this hotel, trying to find some peace alone.
It's a game of chess on the water.
In 1948, West Kirby Sailing Club was invited to send a crew to Dunleary in Ireland for a mixed-class team racing event. This unknown squad surprised everyone by finishing as runners-up to Royal St George. Over a celebratory drink in the hotel, Cyril Clarke and Harry Dennis and Glyn Evans discussed holding a similar event at West Kirby. This idea has germinated into what is now the most celebrated festival of team racing within sailing. In 2019, the Wilson Trophy celebrates its 70th anniversary. We look back over the last 7 decades at some of the thrills and spills both on and off the water. So let's start at the beginning. Calls were made to friends and contacts such as Stuart Morris, a 1948 Olympic gold medalist, and the leading teams of the day duly signed up for the contest. In those days, the marine lake was only half as wide as it is now, so it was decided to hold the morning sailing out on the tide. The club did not own a tractor, as fuel rationing was still in place, so a local horse was volunteered to help take the boats out across the sand. Given the difficulties of moving boats out to the tide and managing crew changes, after 3 years the sailing was exclusively on the marine lake. It certainly had its pros and cons. Soon after, the initial name of the Northwest Firefly Championships was changed to the Wilson Trophy in honour of a much respected Commodore and local businessman, Billy Wilson. Members of West Kirby Sailing Club are said to be indoctrinated within the Wilson family at birth, many starting out as junior volunteers, graduating to racing, then judging, and then volunteering once again. It's a badge of honour. Some of the illustrious Wilson Trophy competitors met at West Kirby's clubhouse to reminisce about this iconic competition and the changes that they have seen.
I first got involved in the Wilson in 1958, believe it or not. I got involved because the guy that taught me sailing was a fellow called Dick Uren, who was a very famous sailor here, and he was already in the team from the start. And he got me really involved, and it was fantastic. I really enjoyed it. After that, I got involved a couple of years on the protest committee, and then under Tony Cross at the time, we went into umpiring.
Like Peter, I started sailing because I was introduced to it by other teams. I actually crewed for Alan Price at the early days in the 1960s. My first Wilson I think was about 1968, and that went through to 1997.
I got involved with the Wilson as a spotty youth, helping as one of the volunteers on the crew party. Then started crewing for a outright gentleman, Mr. Chris Maddox. And he taught me an awful lot about life, sailing, raced on and off with Richard in various events, including this one, until about the 1997s. And then got involved with the corporate side, because at the end of the day there's a lot of stuff to be done, and continue to be a supporter.
I've been a member of West Kirby since the early 70s, but I really got involved with the Wilson Trophy, firstly when I went to London University, and we did a lot of team racing down there. And then I joined a team called London Pirates, and I crewed in the Wilson Trophy. I continued my involvement supporting rather than actually sailing in the event. And then all the way through to the 60th in 2009 when I was Commodore. And so there was an awful lot of work to do in that, but I help and support every year.
The inaugural winners were Itchener Sailing Club, who repeated the first double a year later. Following Itchener's early success, the remainder of the decade was dominated by the universities, with the Irish yacht clubs Royal St George and the National also taking podium positions. In 1957, West Kirby team racing came of age, with the first win for their team and a second following in 1959.
When I started, late 50s, it was a very, very different event. The total event was 62 races. Now we do that in 2.5 hours. Completely different event. The courses, we all know the course now. In those days it could be any course, a full lake course, and it would take half an hour to do a race. Now it's 6 to 8 minutes, I would think.
And that was on the shallow, that was on the small lake there, wasn't it?
Oh yeah.
You know, so that it was 3 foot deep at the deepest.
Oh, that was great, because there are many times where you drop the plate if you wanted to stop someone behind and they'd run into chance of protest.
Help! I need somebody. Help! Not just anybody. Help! You know I need someone. Help!
The 60s were a golden price era for the home club, but they didn't have it all their own way, with Hollingworth Lake completing a back-to-back win in 67 and 68.
But now these days are gone, I'm not so self-assured.
1961, I can't remember whether it was a final or a semi-final, and I had a protest against, I'm very young, my first Wilson, and I had a protest against Keith Musto, who was Olympian or whatever he was then, I don't know. And at that time, the protest room was the gents' toilet at the baths.
Yep.
And all the stalls had flags around them. And I walked in, and there's Hamish Craig, who was the man in charge. I walked in, and Hamish said, "Mr. Price, it's your protest." And I said, "Right." He said, "Tell us what happened." And just as I opened my mouth to give my explanation, the whole system flushed, and all the flags fluttered. And Hamish said to me, "Really?" I'll never forget it. It's the one thing I'll never forget, actually. And we won the protest. Yeah, but yeah, great memories.
So is that where the idea of flags came from?
Good one, good one.
But now these days are gone, I'm not so self-assured. Now I find I've changed my mind, I've opened up the door. Help me if you can, I'm feeling down. And then I do appreciate you being round. Help me get my feet back on the ground.
One of Peter's abiding memories from his time racing the Wilson was in 1961.
It was very windy, and we just had a fantastic race, and I started badly, and I remember just going through and through and through, and then there was Dick Uren, myself and George, and we just went through and through and through. That's the best. The first time I won the Wilson.
To signify the 21st anniversary, a prize key was presented to the winners in 1969. As you can see, Peter Price is proudly clutching onto it here. The early 70s were dominated by the Irish from the Royal St George, alongside Hollingworth Lake, taking over the mantle with another double in 77 and 78.
But for people who actually sailed in the 70s, I was at a castaways dinner a few years ago, and the guy I used to sail with said to me, "Did they ever increase the size of the lake? You forget just how small that lake was and how shallow it was."
By chance, the US universities were team racing their British counterparts, Boosa, in the summer of 77. They visited West Kirby as part of their tour. Steve Benjamin and Neil Fowler recollect two stories, one with a broken champagne bottle slicing Steve's foot and having to be carried off Hilbury Island all the way to the hospital, and Benj explains that they kept running aground whilst the locals seemed to know when to lift their centreboards.
Steve Benjamin and Brad Dellenbar were over here sailing when it was a ditch, and it was only half the width. Steve Benjamin, he said to me, "Oh, we got to sail on that dike." And that's all he said, "It's a ditch, it's a dike. Can't sail on that."
So that was the original side, so that was
They
Well, that
came,
was, so it's pre-85.
they came, and they were sailing down in London against the universities. I think it was Oxford and Cambridge invited them over, and then they came up here.
as an aside.
It wasn't
or
a
as
Wilson, it was just they came up to see how we were team racing. It was a university.
world tour.
Yeah, that sort of thing.
Came here. I remember also sailing against some universities during the summer here on the lake, like a boozer tour.
Probably it was
there,
that.
yeah.
But obviously they went back with the rights idea, and they started coming over.
The Americans certainly had an impact to to the event. It was amazing to sail against them. We learned so much from them. But, you know, we formed some very strong relationships through the years, going over to the Hinman Trophy, them coming over here.
The 80s were a significant time for many reasons. The Americans returned, and this time they were ready to commence battle. The Marine Lake sprung a leak, and a stealth operation commenced to build a multicoloured fleet of Fireflies. The so-called dike burst its banks after it was built in 1899. The new Marine Lake got a well-deserved facelift after 87 years.
It evolved, and the stage was mid-80s, wasn't it, when the lake was extended.
When it got breached and then it was rebuilt, and in that time...
85.
And we came back with that, you know, new thoughts, new vision.
New skills.
New skills, absolutely.
The eye-catching coloured boats and sails, distinguishing all of the teams for the spectators, was only brought in during the mid-80s. Previously, for the first 37 years, the event had been using members' boats and boats borrowed from clubs such as Budworth and Hollingworth Lake.
Didn't they go around the country looking to buy boats, to stop having to borrow them? And then you painted them all.
Dark of night and stuff.
I think we painted them the first year, and then 2 years later, I remember speaking to Bob Fisher, and he said, "Why don't you have coloured sails to match?" And that was it. I think you went out and got the sails then, didn't you?
We went to board.
But Martin Whittingham-Jones, it was under his umbrella, under his Commodore ship, that we did this, and we all used to spend our...
We spent the winter driving around the country, picking up boats, buying them for £50 or £100.
I remember paying people £90, club members, for boats.
As long as it had an aluminium plate. And
You had to have an aluminium plate, yeah.
And if it had a proper
Because our
Mark III
issue
mast,
then was, if we hadn't have done that, then the event would have died,
would
because
have
all
I
of
think
the
it would have
owners
done.
were at a point where the boats were just going to get worn out too quickly. So they're private boats. So to get it to the next stage, driving around the country, buying 32 boats, or whatever it was.
I think the deal I was doing with club members was, we'll buy the boat off you, and you can use it when we don't want to use it.
got you.
But I think that's how I got
You.
I think it was.
But you're right, because people just got tired of loaning the boat. Their pride and joy to go out, and because unfortunately then it was a little bit agricultural. You know.
Well, some of them were sort of parish rigged.
Yes.
I won't tell. Yeah.
So the other reason for changing and buying boats was to try and get them all the same.
All the same, because
You didn't get into his personal boat, which was fast.
and somebody else's
in an old...
you'd have an old
Yeah, because my boat was pretty new actually in those
2108.
2108, which was quite. Oh, hey, well done. And I was quite grieved standing over this boat for sort of 90 quid or whatever it was, but that's the way it went.
But that was great in the barns at the Whittingham Joneses. Painting, so they all were equally good, bad, or indifferent. You know, they were all very similar.
Well, we said they were all the same, didn't we?
Well, they were, yeah, beautifully, impeccably.
Well, they were fireflies.
It was revolutionary because
Aluminium plates, side decks,
and
a fixed mast, not a rotating...
fixed mast, not rotating.
No self-bailers.
No self-bail.
All the bailers were taken out, so nobody had an advantage. You had to use a bucket.
Yeah. And we put in the bags, because I remember we used to have them standing on the transom when they were painted and they were varnished and painted inside. We'd then have them all racked up, and we'd have them 6 or 7, and you'd have a production line going, and we'd be drilling. And I've got to be honest with you, I was hungover, to say the least, one Sunday morning in there, and I drilled right the way through the bottom.
Everything was becoming more professional. We've got a bigger lake. We're getting close to how do we deal with protests and keeping the things moving. People were paying to come for the weekend, but they wanted to sell for the weekend rather than just the Saturday.
Absolutely, that's important.
And then everything so we were practicing. I think you were saying
I was
earlier
saying
that
we never practiced.
never used to practice. We had to practice because those that were coming, those names that are on the trophy over the years,
was
getting stronger and stronger.
It was the pinnacle pot to win. people want...
Still is.
Yes.
No. Well, yeah.
Yeah.
It was up there. It was the World Cup for this. You know, the Americans came, people came from all over Europe.
A healthy rivalry ensued between the Castaways and West Kirby teams, swapping the Wilson Trophy throughout the first half of the 80s, with 3 wins each. A memorable year for another Wilson competitor, Angus Armstrong, was his first in 1988.
And it was a strange one. It wasn't for West Kirby, it was for hospitals. There were a random bunch of medics which had come up, and I got introduced to sailing, or introduced to the Wilson Trophy through that team. And of course, they weren't the best on the water, but they were very good in the bar. And I learnt a lot that day, considering I was only 14, about what the Wilson Trophy really was about.
Ladies with an attitude, fellas that were in the mood. Don't just stand there, let's get to it. Strike a pose, there's nothing to it. Vogue.
The start of the 90s was a spectacular time for the West Kirby team, winning the triple 90, 91 and 92. Part of the legendary crew was 8 times Wilson winner Richard Robinson.
1990 we won the Wilson here, which was sort of a bit of a floodgate for us in our era. You must have had similar times when you just knew as a team of 6 people, you just clicked. And then we clicked the next year and we clicked the year afterwards. And it was just one of those times when you thought,
triple, wasn't it?
it's yeah, and that was our sort of 3 on a trot.
Yeah.
But it was all those years before where you've done a lot of work and enjoyed it all, and it just came to fruition. So that was a...
It was silent sailing. You didn't have... You could tell the team racing, you could tell the people who'd done it a lot and were proficient at it.
Don't talk.
Because there was no need to make a noise. It was a look, or they would expect you to put a mark trap on there, and so that your teammate would be going in for that gap that wasn't there at the moment. But guess what?
You read it.
You knew it was going to happen,
Yeah.
and that was a massive plus, because as soon as you start talking about it, everybody, the opposition know what you're going to do.
But it didn't go all their way, as Angus recalls.
So they've just done their triple, and won it 3 times. And I got asked to sail with Richard. I thought, yes, here we go. I'm going to win a Wilson. It never came about, unfortunately. And for about 3 or 4 years, there was we got to the final every time, but we didn't actually win it. But it was amazing. It was still, I don't think you can ever beat the fact when you're sailing on the lake with about 1,000 people around the lake watching you sail, cheering you on. You can't beat that.
With the wooden Wilson fleet showing its age and needing buckets of epoxy to keep them afloat, a longer-term solution was needed. Under the energetic leadership of Tol Smith, the 1995 World Championships was the catalyst to create an all-plastic fleet of 4 flights with the help of commercial sponsors and members banding together, known as the Ancient Mariners.
And that was, of course, when so many people donated money to actually buy all the coloured fireflies, didn't they? To buy the fireflies. So the whole thing was ramped up, really.
So you've gone from the days when there was no lake, or the lake was a small lake, to a bigger lake, to when we went out and bought all these boats.
All the wooden boats.
All the wooden boats, to a few more years
Yeah.
later when that evolved into financing fiberglass boats,
Absolutely.
Yes.
to getting close to the...
Club members and also
And businesses.
and
businesses
progressing
and-
through to this world where then there was a squad of boats, and the Rondor boats and all of whoever was building them at the time.
Yeah.
And that was the whole event being ramped up year on year, or stage by stage.
Yeah.
So as the competitors became better, the equipment became better, it became slicker, from judges on the water to just the timing clock on the start.
Yes.
So gone are the days where you need a watch around your neck or on your arm or on your crew. Now it tells you what's happening and you can see it.
Well, you concentrate all the time on where your boat is, don't you?
Yeah.
Not.
So it just... I've never sailed anywhere else that has that facility.
No.
I'm sure there will be other...
There probably are now, but at the
but
time,
at its time,
Yeah.
Aside from the Wilson, West Kirby were awarded the honour of hosting the first Team Racing World Championships. Great Britain were crowned champions, with Ireland and Australia taking the remaining podium places. The half-century was reached in 1999, following a dominant streak from the Spinnaker Club. To celebrate the 50th, New York Yacht Club presented a stunning crystal vase and also picked up the Wilson in return.
The 50th anniversary Wilson Trophy, they put it in Joyce Evanson's name, and it's now for the crew. You know, it's a peered trophy that is presented to one crew every year for outstanding crewmanship, and that was something special. And we always come to, you know, the Americans come over, we debate who should win it, etc. And so I won it, yeah. I can't remember which year though. I mean, it was the year I retired because I stayed on long enough to get it, and then I left.
Go inside, for you found its inspiration.
I remember when I lost my mind. There was something so pleasant about that place. Even your emotions had an echo.
Pirates from the New Forest, Silver Pandas from the USA, a Scouse Hawk and a couple of Spinnakers fluttered around the Wilson Trophy podium through the noughties.
But it wasn't because I didn't know enough.
Being part of a winning squad is considered the pinnacle of your team racing career. Angus Armstrong recalls his experience of 2001.
It was so emotional the day that we won it in 2001 that, and I can remember it now, that we partied all night. I think West Kirby got sold out of champagne and whatever. I mean, we partied until goodness knows what time in the morning. But we still got up at 4 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the morning, because we couldn't quite believe it. And we walked down to where the grandstand is always pitched and sat in there, and we looked over the Field of Dreams, because that's what we called it. And it really was the Field of Dreams. It was just, you know, it's centremost to all my sailing career. So it's, you know, Wilson Trophy is just fantastic.
Since the first USA team took part in 1983, the American involvement has been central to the history of the Wilson. American teams have won 7 times and been runners-up 8 times. For 3 years running in 2006, 7 and 8, the finals were all American affairs.
You really think you're in control? Well, I think you're crazy.
The council had emptied the lake in the October before the event. And this was the 60th, so a big event, you know, marquee, 42 teams, the whole works. They were very helpful and said, OK, well, we'll make sure that the water's back in the lake for the event. So we said, oh, that's fab, well done, thank you very much indeed. So anyway, time got closer and closer, and the tides were due to be, about 10 days before, they were due to come over the top. But they'd actually increased the height of the wall.
Great.
And it didn't come over.
I remember that.
And I'm thinking, this is not going to happen. This event, a week before, it's just not going to happen. So I was worrying myself to death over this. And anyway, I came down one morning, and suddenly the water was trickling over the top. And I burst into tears. I was so relieved that it happened. And of course, the event went ahead and was fantastic.
60th was a huge success, and even a few VIPs turned up to watch the action and enjoy the famous Wirral hospitality. A new prize was presented at the Wilson to award and promote youth participation, which is strongly contested by under-21 teams. One of the next generation of Wilson team racers is Alex Colquitt, a leading British youth sailor who remembers his first regatta racing with local legend Jamie Marston in 2011.
Coming off the start line, and I didn't really know what was going on sitting in the front of the boat. There were people shouting everywhere, boats everywhere, but we came off the start line and for a second it was calm, and we knew that all we had to do was get to the mark before anyone else, and yeah, that's really stuck with me, just before all the carnage came back together.
This is how I show my love.
Competition has always been fierce, and at the highest level, including recently members of the British sailing team taking part.
We've seen drastic change. I mean, and it's not just in the actual boats and the setup and formula, but the teams as well. The teams have completely changed to what was club racing, or pretty much club racing, to now teams that form for years and train and go all over the world.
Over the last 70 years, there have been major developments to how the Wilson is run. The club and volunteers strive each year to surpass the previous one, enabling the sailors to have a memorable experience in the racing and socially.
You know, some of the key highlights and things which made the difference was the better equipment, so the plastic boats, which were, you know, which didn't sink and actually were a little bit more robust. We got the Swiss League, which had, you know, made sure that everybody can actually sail and get lots and lots of races in. I don't know whether that was a good thing or bad thing in my book. I mean, I think it's a great thing for the Wilson Trophy, but when you're trying to get rid of a hangover and you used to have 2 hours, whatever, reading the paper, you don't get that anymore. It's fast-paced. I think we talked about it before, about having the clock. The clock just makes it, because actually you all know when you're coming up to the line. Umpiring, as much as we detest them, have just brought on the amazing team racing that we see today.
One of the key highlights of the Wilson is the infamous social and genuine hospitality of West Kirby Sailing Club on the Saturday evening.
The night before, there isn't anything on, so everybody can get to meet all their pals that they were at uni with, or they knew somebody because they were at uni with, or they were friends. And I think these relationships, they definitely go on.
They flourish, they build.
Our contemporaries who are all over the place now, we connect with them today. I've connected with my contemporaries again because of the children, and we all relate to what we used to do when they used to come here as castaways or Nottingham Outlaws. And we're still mates today. Fantastic.
The event is best in class.
And the beach parties.
The beach parties inside.
With the umbrellas and the...
Tolls, umbrellas
John
and the champagne parties, yeah. Social's really important. And as I say, it does bond it. I mean, the sailing obviously is the most important thing. And I think, especially these days where people get a whole weekend sailing, I think it's better and better because everybody gets as much sailing as they really want. But the evening, everybody's terribly enthusiastic. Very, very enthusiastic socially.
You've got dual objectives in the weekend, haven't you? To win the event and to win the social. Because both are as important.
And it's pretty difficult to win both.
It is impossible.
It's changed over the years, of course, because when it first started, 16 of the teams were out on the Saturday night, so they were really out for fun. They were, yeah.
Angus Armstrong recalls his experience from competing at the social too.
It's not just the racing, which is superb, is the social. Now, you have to win the social. You know, that was something which came, you know, was in my nature. I mean, I loved sailing, but I loved partying too. And the one thing which I really enjoyed was the Saturday night, the Wilson Trophy. And Steve Dransfield, I think, was one of our sort of peers and helped sort out. He does all the, you know, he does quite a lot of the racing. He came up to me and said, "You're only allowed 2 beers tonight, 2 beers." And that's fine. I said, okay. And he caught me later, and I had a pint here and a pint here, and he said, 2 beers. I said, yeah, well, I've only got 2 beers at a time.
The significant reason for the huge success is down to volunteering. Umpires, safety, beach, race officials, catering, accommodation are just a few to mention.
The pride that I think that the club members get in actually providing such a service to the competitors that come here and who love it and come back year on year. It is just like one big family, very hard working family, I have to say, but everybody has a job, and the, you know, people are good at certain things, and it's incredible who will actually turn up at 6 in the morning to make breakfast for people. You know, and they do it without any complaint, just because they want the event to be a success.
It's in our DNA. That's what we do
It
at
is.
this club. You do that, and you know, people who don't sail, who don't have a boat anymore, they will have teams staying with them because they want to be part of it. That's their way of putting something back in to, not the club, to the event. It's the event. It's not. You know. This
Quite
is,
right. I think most members appreciate that the Wilson Trophy is renowned right across the world. West Kirby, team racing, Wilson Trophy, and they just want to be involved.
When I first started again, so 1970-ish, Joyce Evans, wonderful name, was actually running accommodation.
Yes.
She always made sure that I had the most good-looking team to stay with me. It was fantastic. And it's gone on like that ever since.
Holly Marston is one of the next generation, following in her father's footsteps in both racing and volunteering.
My family have been involved with the Wilson Trophy for as long as I can remember. Obviously my dad's had a massive involvement with it, but I think people understand what goes on behind the scenes, you know, the organisation skills, the club. It's not like the Wilson's finished and then we wait till May. It's right, plan the next one. My grandpa is very much involved with that as well, and people, I think people sometimes forget the amount of people from the sailing club that volunteer and sit down from May the 11th to plan the next one and get it all sorted. My family have been very much involved. Me and my sister, we before we could sail properly or in the event, we would come down, wash boats, and all the juniors, it would be a massive thing.
The Wilson has not lost its attraction for new recruits to compete and triumph at this iconic regatta.
Last year was our first year having an all-female team for West Kirby, which was a very proud moment, I've got to say. It was good, it was special. I also sail on the international match racing circuit, which is an all-women's circuit called WIMRA. Team racing has been like a major part in my life because I first started off team racing and I absolutely loved it. It was just the best thing.
This little trophy has inspired top racing, club spirit, team building and enduring memories. It looks certain to continue to inspire for many more decades to come.
The last time I sailed in the Wilson, we came 4th, and the year before that we won, which I think you could say is the best memory I have throughout my life, is winning that event. You win with your childhood, you know, idols, and it's a massive thing.